Okay, everybody, welcome to the show. My name's Daniel Epstein. I'm here with my co-host Raj Kavadi. Today we have with us Dr. Lynn Lassiter. Dr. Lynn Lassiter earned her MD degree at Meharry Medical College in 2010 and completed her postgraduate emergency medical training at Morristown Medical Center in Morristown, New Jersey. She currently serves as the Assistant Medical Director at Mount Sinai Medical Center Freestanding Emergency Department and has been selected as one of America's best in medicine. Dr. Lynn also has her own medical marijuana clinic and company. To learn more about her, visit askdrlynn.com. We have been very fortunate to have Dr. Lynn as a faculty member at Nova Southeastern University. And thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Lynn.
Thank you for having me and inviting me, guys. I do appreciate it. How's everything going?
Good for me so far. How about you, Raj?
Doing great. Thank you so much for being here.
Awesome. Never a problem.
So I just wanted to get started now. So tell us a little bit about yourself and where are you from originally?
No problem. So originally from New York, born and raised in New York, and then kind of moved all up and down the East Coast. My background is from Jamaica, and my dad is also Cantonese, Chinese. So I'm West Indian and Chinese as well, and grew up in New York City, so I have that edge, and then did college and high school in Washington, D.C. before finally settling in Tennessee for medical school, and then back up north to Jersey for Morristown Medical Center, where I completed my 3-year ER residency. And immediately, as soon as I finished there, ran down to Florida to get some sunshine for the start of my career down here.
So you've kind of been all over the place a little bit.
Yeah, I'm an East Coast girl.
All right. So what made you decide to go to medical school and get into medicine in the first place?
Honestly, my older sister, I've always loved medicine, but my older sister, we were in like our 3rd and 4th year of college at Trinity College, and she was my RA. So we graduated both a year early, super competitive, but it was like a friendly, great competition. And she was like, you know what? I think I'm just going to go get my PhD. And I'm like, in what? And she's like, English. I want to write. I want to do, journalism. I want to teach. So I was like, okay, cool. And then I was like, oh, but you're not going to be the only doctor. I'm going to go to medical school. And she was like, for real? I was like, yeah. So it started off like that. And then just, within 2 years, finished my MCATs and started my applications, did a 1-year internship at NIH after graduating medical school to get some research under my belt, and then enrolled at Meharry Medical College. So it started off as a friendly competition. I've always had, a love for medicine and helping people, but it was really my inspiration through her to kind of push me in that direction, because it was just like, oh no, we're gonna have 2 doctors in the family. Let's go.
That's great. What kind of research were you doing at the NIH?
Oh man, it was so long ago. It was definitely 20 years ago. But I did work with the Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute. So I was able to do some research there with phospholipids and stuff like that. Ended up getting a publication out of it, which was great. So it helped to boost my applications, having that background, because I didn't have enough time when I was actually in college to pursue research. So having that authorship definitely gave me a good conversation point when I was doing my interviews and stuff like that. But it was a great experience. It also made me realize I don't want to do research long term. It's not my passion. It's not, where I am my happiest in terms of being behind a bench all day or in a lab all day. I'm much more of a people person, and I need that interaction with patients. So it wasn't a clinical trial, so I didn't have the patient interaction. It was more, testing and labs and Peachtree dishes and, hoods and that kind of stuff, chemicals. And it just wasn't in my nature to pursue it long term. So didn't go that route, but it was a great experience.
I have a question. So you decided that research might not be your favorite thing, but everyone knows when you're applying for residency, it's like a competition of how much research you can get.
Yes.
So as you went throughout medical school, did you get more, or did you kind of improve your application other ways, or how did you go about that?
So when you start medical school, if you have an idea of where you want to go in terms of what discipline of medicine you want to be involved in, it's always good to get hooked up with a mentor early and try to get involved in any ongoing research projects with the faculty or, clinical advisors and stuff like that, because you hope by the end of 4 years you would be able to have some kind of publication. If not, starting your own trial that's approved with your medical school is always great too, because then you can be first author. But it did not occur to me until my third year that I wanted to do emergency medicine. And by that time, I was just really trying to survive, rotations and kind of get all of those under my belt. So that way I can start my fourth year and applying for my specialty. But I didn't have much time, and I did not, I wasn't conclusive about which direction I wanted to go. Everyone will tell you any kind of research is great, but especially research in the discipline that you want to be involved in is really key.
Okay. Go for it, Raj.
Oh, yeah. So what got you to emergency medicine?
Yep.
It was really a lifestyle choice, to be honest. By the time I hit my fourth year, I was engaged to be married, and I was a few months pregnant, and I was realizing what quality life I wanted to have. Do I want to be able to do a Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, and I'm more of an early morning person? Am I more of a late night person? What's the flexibility in terms of lifestyle? Do I want to have call or no call? And what kind of city do I want to live in? Things like that. So as I started to kind of go down my list of priorities in terms of what's important to me, the disciplines started to kind of cross off the list. I definitely didn't want to do OB. I didn't want the call. I didn't want to do surgery. I hate early mornings. So I started kind of banging them off that way. And then once I got into my end of my third year, I was able to do like a 1 or 2 week rotation through internal medicine in the emergency department. And the fast pace, the quick satisfaction, the ability to get people in and out, not having to follow them, stuff like that was definitely more of my speed and my personality. So I felt like I was impactful in a short amount of time, and patients loved you. By the time they leave, they're either happy or dead, right? So it's like, okay, thanks so much for helping me. You cured my pain. I really appreciate it. Or thank you for my med refills. Thank you for the referrals. Whatever it is that you're helping them do, was immediate gratification. And then I also got to use a lot of procedure skills in terms of intubating and central lines and suturing and, splinting. So I realized what I do love, and I love having that option with both. And ER fit more of my personality, and the lifestyle is amazing. Like, that's definitely what I prefer. I do 12-hour shifts, and I only have to work 12 days a month. So it allows me a lot of flexibility to start my own business, which is how we got to ask Dr. Lynn.
So that's very interesting. Thank you for sharing that with us. So adding on to that, could you walk us through a typical day in the life of an ER doc?
Well, there's no typical day.
Okay.
That's for sure, because you never know what's going to kind of walk into the emergency department or get wheeled in via ambulance or EMS. So there isn't a typical day, but depending on what type of facility you work at, there's many different levels in emergency medicine. Once you're board certified, you can do something like urgent care center, where you see a higher volume of patients with less acuity, things more like cough, cold, sprains, chest pains, shortness of breath, those kind of things, seasonal allergies, med refills. So it's a different level of acuity. You're not dealing with trauma or penetrating trauma or, gunshot wounds or things like that at a urgent care center. But if you are more interested in having a little bit of both, you would want to practice at like a teaching facility where you can, see your trauma victims, but also get a good dose of your healthy community,
Mm-hmm.
And that way you're getting your chest pains, you're getting your CHF, you're getting your DVTs, you're getting your, strokes, your heart attacks. And those patients are critical, but you're also getting a good amount of penetrating trauma as well too. So your gunshot wounds, your stab wounds, your motor vehicle accidents, all of those kind of things, fall from heights greater than 8 feet, stuff like that. So you're having a good blend. So it really, there's a ER doctor, and then there's an ER doctor, right? So just because, you're an ER physician doesn't mean you all practice the same style of medicine. They say it's good when you're starting into emergency medicine to go to more of a higher volume, faster paced facility where you're able to see everything. And then as you get later in your career and you start to get a little bit more burned out, people kind of slow down and gradually go to the urgent care centers, because that volume and that, day-to-day running up and down is not as appealing when you're 60 years old. So it just kind of depends on what style of medicine you love. And then there's the aspect of teaching. Do you want to work at an academic facility with residents? Do you want to teach and be a part of the staff? Or are you looking to kind of get in, be a straight attending, not worry about administrative stuff as much, and kind of get out? So all of that is determined by your experience, and I think you have to kind of go through it in order to understand what type of place you love. Like, I trained at a level 1 trauma center at Morristown Hospital. So I had every single specialty at my advantage. I could call, with one page. I can get vascular on the phone. I can get CT thoracic. I can get podiatry. Like, I always had a resident or a specialist to kind of come in and take over in that respect once we've stabilized the patient, and also teach me something. Versus when you go to more of a remote facility or like a freestanding emergency department, you don't have direct access to those specialties, and you have to kind of do your consults via phone or telemedicine or transfer patients out. So you have to figure out what works best for you. And you also don't want to get burnout, because that is super real. You don't want to get jaded in the process, and you want to make sure that you preserve yourself for the longevity of it. Because when I was, doing residency, my oldest clinical director was 79 years old. It's something that you can do till you die, essentially, because it's such a vast discipline that you can continue to teach and practice and work with students, as long as you physically and mentally can. But you have to make sure that you're able to preserve the long shifts, the high intensity, the not knowing what's going to come into the door, and making sure you're staying well read and versed about changes in different type of, paradigms for ACLS and PEDS and things like that. So things that you don't do every day, you still got to stay certified in. But you'll find that out once you get into it, for sure.
So I have a question.
Go ahead, Dan.
I don't think I've mentioned to you, but I actually am interested in emergency medicine. And with this podcast, we plan on having, all specialties on, but at the moment, I'm interested in emergency. And you mentioned that you were able to do an internal medicine rotation where you got to spend some time in the ER. And I'm curious, is that something that most students get to do, or?
It just depends. Usually you have like 1 or 2 internal medicine blocks, and within that 12-week block, either 1 week is spent with radiology, 1 week is spent on at a like a rural facility, like a clinic. 1 week is spent in the ER, so that way you can get that experience of how admitting patients, come into the emergency department, they get worked up and then transferred to internal medicine for admissions. So you get to understand that flow of practice. And that's where I got my first introduction to emergency medicine, was through my required internal medicine rotation, because EM is a specialty you can't do it till your 4th year after you finished all your rotations. So it wasn't something that I could just kind of go in and shadow or things like that. I had to have my core disciplines first. So I believe it's still in that, kind of set up to give students exposure at some point in their 3rd year, whether it's 1 or 2 weeks that are required, or maybe just even a couple of shifts that are required. But you should be able to rotate in the ER through your internal medicine rotation, if that's still NOVA's, pipeline.
Okay, I like that, because I know that whenever I do anything, I'm usually not good at it the first time, maybe not the second time, but by the 3rd time, I'm starting to improve. And with emergency medicine, there's it seems that there's a lot on the line on that rotation. You really need a good letter and stuff like that. And so I was wondering how students were able to navigate being new at something, but still shining under pressure like that.
So I always tell students, especially by the time you get to setting up your specialty rotations by your 4th year, you want to make sure that the hospital or residency that you really, really, really want to go to, you want to rotate on in your second or third rotation, not your very first ER rotation. So that way you'll have a little bit more of a background in terms of, you know, things that they don't really teach you in the book, like what size needle do I use to numb this incision? What size suture is appropriate for the patient? How do I set up a sterile field for the doctor? How do I consult for Doppler exams with the technicians? How do I, you know, do just kind of regular level day-to-day stuff, understanding how to work the Pyxis or the Epic X-ray machine or things like that, you know, just how to pull up images. So just kind of your basic level stuff, you're not going to get till you really get into your first rotation. And if you're trying to impress a emergency medicine residency, you want to go to the facility that you ultimately want to be at a little bit later down the line, like maybe at least your second or even your third rotation. So that way you'll have more of a just all kind of going in and not be a complete newbie on the scene.
Okay.
But definitely in order to kind of get into ER, I would say you have a much greater chance by doing a rotation at the facility that you want to be at, so you can impress them and stand out that way, as opposed to just being kind of a name in a pool and you've never rotated there and the doctors can't put a face with an application or remember, oh yeah, that was the kid that did that great intubation, had good follow-up with their patients, checked on them in the ICU once they left the department, you know, made sure they did their callbacks to see how their patients were doing, things like that. So you really don't kind of learn that until you start working in the emergency department. So I'd say push the facility that you want to be at to a little bit later in your rotation schedule.
Okay.
So,
And
yeah, go ahead. No, I was just so going back to kind of the emotions that you have to manage while in the emergency room. So,
Yeah.
what types of things do you do to mentally prepare for those situations, and how do you maintain that mental stamina consistently, day in and day out?
Good question. It was kind of hard initially, to be honest. I had to learn to compartmentalize a lot. So that way you don't carry the weight of losing your patient in bed 8 and just finishing a code into doing a suture repair on a 6-year-old in bed 3, that, you know, you're trying to keep them calm and make sure that you are prepared to deal with the mom and or the dad, and make sure that you're able to console the patient as they're about to go through this scary experience as well. So compartmentalizing is really key, to make sure that you're processing but able to continue flow, because at the end of the day you still have to move the meat, you have to move the patients in and out. It's all a business, and it's really important that they're watching patient satisfaction scores, they're watching door to doctor time, length of stay in the emergency department, time from entrance to discharge. They're tracking all of those metrics, which are important parts of your performance. So you have to remain level-headed, and you have to make sure that you're continuing to not hold up the department. Because if the department comes to a standstill and you have a full waiting room and you have continuous EMSs coming in through the ambulance bay, like nothing moves, you know, so you are the main person. So making sure that you are mentally, you know, sane and calm and, you know, efficient in your process is really key. And the only way to do that is to kind of tuck it away and deal with it at the end of the day. You know, one of my things that I do for downtime is that ride home. I always finish my charts at work. I never come home and hop on the computer and do charts and stuff like that. I'd rather stay 1 or 2 hours after work and finish charting, as opposed to come home and have to deal with that, because I want to keep my home as my sanctuary. And once I get here, you know, spending time with my girls is really important to me. They don't care that you have, you know, 60 charts in your box and stuff like that. They don't understand. They just like, oh, we haven't seen you in 14 hours. Thank you for coming home. Finally, me time, you know? So you want to be able to be present for them as well too. But everybody finds what works for them. Some people, you know, if you're doing a 12-hour shift, they just can't wait to get out of the ER by the time their shift is over and would rather do charting at home or remotely, in a more relaxed space. So it just really depends on what your process is and what you like. But decompressing and also dealing with it and not, overlooking it. One of the best things that I have found is follow up. So understanding what happened to my patient once they left me, that helps to put closure on things for me. And whether that is the patient went to the ICU and I get to kind of monitor and track and talk to the specialist and see, did I do everything appropriately and stuff like that. That's key for closure. And then for the patients that you lose, following up with family, making sure that they understand, how do I get a copy of the death certificate? How do I get the autopsy report? How do I navigate the funeral process? Even though that's technically not a part of your job, making sure that you have the resources to kind of help and share with them are also a key part in feeling like, okay, I played a role in this person's life. Let me at least, help the family navigate in their death. Because it's important that you are always present, and it's important that you are always mindful that this is super hard and difficult for everybody. So you don't just walk in the room and pronounce a patient and then walk out and, kind of lose contact. So being able to understand a little bit more about that patient's life and the kids they're leaving behind and what they enjoyed the most, all of those things are really key for me personally to add closure to situations and be able to kind of move forward and feel like I did my best. So everyone is a little different emotionally, but that was, one of the things that I learned that helped me the most in those kind of situations that were unfortunate.
Thank you. To me, in my head, I've always kind of imagined the emergency room to be one step below like the military, because you have to be ready for anything at all times, and you have to be
Yes.
calm and collected in the most crazy, chaotic situations. That's kind of what I think is attracting me towards the ER. Have you had any days that you just maybe had a breakdown afterwards, or just your emotions just got the best of you and stuff like that?
Definitely. And, everyone processes differently. Sometimes it's not external in terms of tears and crying and things like that, but it's more internal, and it manifests in being short in your disposition with your family or with your kids or with your spouse. Sometimes you inadvertently, are a little bit more snappy with customer service when you're, waiting for the last 10 minutes and you're like, I got things I could be doing, so you notice that it comes out in different ways. And for everyone, it's not the dark room sitting in your closet and tears down your face. Like, for everyone, it's a little bit different on how you process and unpack your emotions, but making sure whatever your process is, that you're able to acknowledge it and be present in it and kind of, work through it. At one point, I did use a therapist as I was kind of getting into residency. I noticed my first couple months were super hard. That jump from being a resident, I'm sorry, not residency, but into my first career job as an attending. That transition from being a resident and having that support to going to a single coverage hospital where I was the emergency medicine physician covering the entire ER, but also covering all the codes in the entire hospital overnight. So being the only physician in the entire facility was really different for me. I came from a level 1 trauma center where I had everybody at no matter what time of night. So really being alone in the process and making sure that, I was doing all the right things for the patient was critical. So unpacking some of that emotion and responsibility and burden, I started seeing a therapist. And you know what? Everyone says doctors are the worst patients, and it's because you just know too much. You know too much. So when you're talking to a therapist, it's really easy to predict what they're going to say. So you have to make sure you're matched with somebody that you respect and that you trust. And therapy, it wasn't as great for me as I thought it was going to be, but I found that, what my outlet ultimately became was talking to my sister, who's my best friend, who's, my lightweight competition, who keeps me on my toes and makes me my best self. She became my therapist ultimately. I just don't pay her. So I pay her in food and wine. But I tried to see a professional, for their services at one point, and it didn't really work for me personally because I was able to kind of, predict the books that she wanted me to read or the journals that she recommended that I write and start to keep and maintain, or, the techniques for trying to go through your Siggy caps and, try to find what works for you and stuff like that. So I was not the best patient in that respect, but I needed more of a therapist probably instead of a, psychiatrist. And that is something that I learned through that process. Fortunately, I was able to find my outlet pretty early. I just realized I needed to start talking more and not holding it inside. I usually try to not bring my work home, but being able to have my sister as my springboard and kind of bounce ideas off of her. Not that she has a medical background, but just some things are not medicine. They're more, did I approach this right? Do you think, when I got into this conflict with this consultant, did I say this right? Could I have done this differently? Just trying to navigate if I am being my best self, which reflects in how I treat my patients. So that's something that I've definitely grown in the last 5-6 years practicing independently on how to be, your best quality self. And it's been life-changing. It's definitely been life-changing in terms of how I process and how I take time for myself, and my peace becomes much more serene. It's one thing to be off from work, but you have to also mentally detach. So your family will tell you, the people who are closest to you, the style of how you practice becomes a part of who you are. For example, I have like very minimal patience with the long-winded stories and, oh my gosh, then my dog tripped and then I fell over my dog and I sprained my right ankle and then my thumb started to hurt. Like I kind of zone out. So I really try to ask questions that keep the patient on track without them seeing that I'm cutting them off, but try to get to the key and the meat of the story. And my family will tell you in just general conversation that I'm very abrupt with that too. I'm like, all right, I don't need to know the 55 lights that you ran today or the car that honked at you. Tell me, just the two important things. Like, let's get to the point. So your impatience and some of those things that you find that you have to, you got to move people in the ER. So your thought process is very quick. I have had to relearn how to just do general conversation and not anticipate what the answer of the person is going to be. I've had to relearn how to engage people, and not for a purpose of obtaining something. Like, in the ER, you're trying to get to the point. What is the point? Why are you here? What brought you here? I've had to kind of understand steps in terms of how to just be a good listener and how to be a good friend. So you're always reevaluating who you are, and you're always kind of adjusting to accommodate, because you got to meet people on their level. So that's one thing that's awesome about the ER. You get such a diverse population of people that you have to be a chameleon, and you have to be able to relate to people, otherwise they won't tell you the real truth. So it's been a process, and it's not something you learn in 3 years or 4 years of residency. It's an evolving process in your life, I would say. And I'm still, kind of going through that and hopefully getting better, because that's ultimately my goal. I'm really conscious of it.
I really love that answer. And I just wanted to follow up with that. So you were talking about compartmentalization and being able to separate your emotions and detach in certain situations. And it's so hard to do that throughout medical school and obviously in residency and beyond. And journaling and things like that, I found to be quite helpful. I found talking to some of my best friends to be super helpful. And kind of like you were saying, it's just experimenting with different outlets. And I can't imagine in the emergency room is probably on a whole nother level. What are some ways that we can kind of, because there's no one right answer, like you said, and there's different ways to adapt. What are ways that we can improve on our adaptability and being open to try different things at the right time? Because one way is not going to work for you forever, like you were saying. So
absolutely,
how do we improve that adaptability, and what could we work on now, especially year 1 and year 2, when we don't have a lot of that human interaction and experience? What can we work on now? What types of skills can we improve on?
I think what you said is really key. It's about recognizing that it's important, that it's an evolving process, and it's not, I've learned this one method and this is what I'm going to run with for the rest of my life. And also recognizing when you need to adapt and when you need to change and evolve and grow, because all of those losses or all of those, mistakes that you've made, because we've all made them, they're always a growing process and an evolving process that you have to really learn from it and you have to own up to it. So one thing that's really key, and I tell all my students who are rotating and my medical students and stuff like that, is never lie, never, ever, ever, ever lie. Like, because there's always somebody coming after you, whether it is a senior resident or whether it's an attending or whether it's a specialist. So for example, my first, like one of my med student rotations or whatever, it was a GI bleed and I didn't do the rectal exam. And I said I did it. And I was like, yeah, the person had bright red blood in their rectal exam, right? Just a straight up lie. I didn't do it. Not for any particular reason. I just didn't do it. I forgot to do it, whatever. And my attending goes back. And I'm thinking, I've already done the rectal, so he's not going to traumatize the patient and do another rectal. So my attending goes back and they saw the patient without me present. They went and did their own independent evaluation, did the rectal exam, and had melena, had black stool. And he came out of the room with the glove, with the melena on his finger. I'll never forget it. And comes up to me, and I'm in like the fishbowl where everybody's sitting and, all the other students and doctors are. And he's like, does this look like bright red stool? Per rectum. On my rectal exam, I got melena, which is a different type of workup. It kind of determines is it upper GI versus lower GI and how you're going to manage it. And I'm like, yeah. So he's like, one more time, did you do the rectal? And, it was just like, oh my God, but I didn't. And for somebody to call you out, in front of everybody like that. And it was a very simple, easy exam. It's not that I didn't know how to do it. I forgot, or I didn't do it, and I didn't want to look like a slacker, whatever the reason was at the time. I'll never forget that situation because it kind of has stuck with me forever. So when I'm talking to students on rotations and I'm asking them, did you check the pulses or did you do this? Did you, and if they are like 2+ pulses in all 4 extremities, full range of motion, reflexes. I'm like, you did reflexes? Like, yeah, reflexes. I'm like, funny, this person has a right below the knee amputation. How'd you get a reflex and a 2+ pulse on, their prosthetic leg? So things like that, you have to, it's not about calling you out, but it's about making you better, because I'd rather you be, embarrassed or offended or called out with me rather than with the patient, because once they see that, they're going to lose trust in your ability. It's all a learning process. And it's important that you remember those small moments that kind of shaped your style and your technique. So from that, one experience, like I've never lied. There's one of those things that is just like, when you're calling a consultant and they'll be like, did you do a FAST exam? And it's either yes or no, you did or you didn't do it. Maybe you should have and stuff like that, but you always want to answer respectfully and say, you know what, I'm going to get to it and I'll call you back, or I'll text you with the results, or I'll put it in the computer with the images and the video. Like you want to kind of show initiation and initiative, and show that you are proactive in your approach, but just don't lie. It's always going to bite you in the ass, some way or another. It's always going to come back around and get you. And it's not, in the patient's best interest, because it can change the course of management and how you take care of the patient. So that's my one caveat with students. Never be cavalier about, a problem that the patient is coming in with. Patient might come in like, I'm having a cold for the last 3 days, and students will come to you as they're doing their presentations. They're like, yeah, the patient just has a viral upper respiratory infection, supportive management with Tylenol or Motrin and fluids at home. And you have to always keep a wide differential in the emergency department. A lot of patients come because they can't get to their ER doctor, or because they can't get to their PCP, or can't get to their regular care and management, or need medication refills. But a lot of people also don't understand how sick they really are, and they wait and delay until they finally come in and they're about to tip over, and be on that edge rather than being on the preventative side. So never underestimate or be cavalier about a patient's complaint. That's the, best way to turn off your attending, because you don't know what you're going to see. And really, you never know. I had a patient the other day that came in for constipation, and the student, recommended that we do labs. And I was like, why would you do labs on constipation? Why wouldn't you just get an abdominal x-ray? What do you think? They have no major medical problems. They had been using a lot of mag citrate and laxatives and enemas and just being very obsessed about their bowels. And turns out they were in full renal failure with a creatinine of 11 and underwent dialysis. And, it just became from something very small like constipation into something huge. And it is always an eye opener, because you begin to get like routine in terms of your approach and how you manage certain complaints. But things like that take you back to basics and say, okay, I need to always keep a wide differential. I need to always think worst case scenario first in the emergency department, as opposed to if you were doing internal or family medicine, you think, preventative care and best case scenario. So always just being mindful of that. But compartmentalizing is the only way that has kept me sane in my journey. And that's just what has worked for me. And you got to find what your thing is and what your outlet is. Once I discovered talking to my sister in terms of how to deal with my emotions or my, concerns or things like that, I became a much better person in terms of decompressing, because she's like up at 6 a.m. when I'm getting off work. I spend that, half an hour on the ride home kind of going through my night with her, and it allows me to release, as opposed to carrying it into the next shift and the next shift and the next shift, that by the time you get to your third or fourth shift, you're like so drained and so overwhelmed and unsure about your decision making that, it really does show. So it's important to find whatever it is for you that works for you, continue to pursue that and continue to grow with that process, because it will change and it will evolve as we get older and as we kind of become more, we just become different as we get older. And it's important to acknowledge that, and it's important to grow with that and understand whatever it is you're feeling, sit in that moment and make sure that you have ways to kind of release. So that's been my biggest thing, taking care of self. And I tell all my students that, you can't be great for anyone else unless you're good within yourself, which for me means I might be having a bad day at home. I might have just got into a fight with my husband and then I got to do a 12-hour shift. I got to compartmentalize that too, so that I can be great for my patients as well, because I have a responsibility to them. So it is very important that compartmentalization is not just in your career or in work, but in your life in general, and whether it's healthy or not, I don't know. I just know it has been one of the things that has helped me to kind of push through and maintain over the last couple of years.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question. So back reverse a little bit. So when you said you were doing research, you realized that it wasn't necessarily for you because you weren't able to see patients.
Yeah.
I think some people might have the wrong idea about emergency medicine, giving you less of an opportunity to develop deep relationships with patients. Can you elaborate on that? Because you said that you like the way you get to interact with patients with your job now.
Definitely. So what I mean by that is I don't follow you up. I don't see you every 2 to 4 months to refill your hypertensive medications. I don't get to, follow you in your depression and see you every 2 weeks to see how your reaction has been to this new antidepressant medication that I started you on. I don't get that long-term care with you. So a lot of times you'll treat something and you'll never know, like, okay, did the cellulitis get better? Were the antibiotics helpful? Did the corneal abrasion improve? Did you see the ophthalmologist? So if you don't call and do your follow-up with the patients, most times, you can't do that with every patient because you just have way too many. But special cases you want to take note of, so that way you can understand what was, what happened to the patient once they left you. But in terms of meaningful relationships, every interaction with the patient is meaningful, every single one. And you have to remember that patients will trust you with their deepest, darkest secrets that they won't even tell their wife or husband that they've been married to for 40 years. You know, I've had patients come in and, you know, I had a mother probably about 2 weeks ago come in. She's a mother with a 13-year-old son. I remember she brought the son in with her, and she had like a 2-year-old daughter. And she wanted the kids to step outside while she talked to me. And I'm like, where are they going to go? Like, I can't watch these kids. Like, so we sent the kids to the nurse's station just to give the mom 10 minutes to be able to talk with me. But, you know, the mom ended up contracting HIV and with her last relationship and stuff like that, things that she hasn't even shared with her family, you know? So her having that time to be honest with me without her kids present and allowing her to really tell me, you know, what was going on. And it helped me to put together why this lady's having thrush, or why this lady is, you know, experiencing, you know, these symptoms, and be able to clinically diagnose that there's some anxiety and depression going on, and her fear of somebody finding out and, you know, kind of notifying other people. That was a big, you know, factor for her. So it's not that the interaction is less meaningful, but there is less longevity in it. And there are patients that I see so regularly, it's like I am their primary care doctor. You know, I have my typical drug seekers. I have my elderly patients who are just lonely at home and come into the ER, which seems like every single shift I work, you know, on a regular weekly basis. And I have my patients who, you know, are just passing through, and out of towners, and just, you know, sprain their ankle and need to get crutches, or, you know, something like that. And I have good relationships with the primary care doctors who send their patients to the emergency department too. So I end up seeing my chronic patients often, you know, and often for me is 4 times a year, you know, whether you're coming in with florid CHF, you know, 3 or 4 times a year, whether you're coming in with that, you know, repeat chest pain that you're worried about and need to do a cardiac cath or get a workup. So there is a good healthy dose of people that I see on a regular basis. It's just not on a weekly basis or on a monthly basis. It's episodically. But, you know, there's some people who just love the ER, and I get to see them all the time. And it's like my greatest joy, you know? So I have those people. But continuity of care is very different in emergency medicine as it is in internal versus family versus OB. OB, you see those patients every 3 to 4 weeks like clockwork, right? So once you start getting into the second and third trimester, you start seeing them weekly. So you build a different relationship with somebody that you're that intimate with for 10 months, as opposed to, you know, me seeing somebody 3 times a year. And it's a different reason why you're coming in. It's more of an acute, immediate care reason that you need to address. So the interaction is not less special by any means, but it is different, and you have to kind of honor that. And it requires a lot more work in terms of follow-up. Because normally if patients are doing well, they're not going to call you and say, hey doc, great job. You know, you don't get those calls. You always get the calls when something didn't work. Like, doc, that pain medicine didn't work, or doc, I couldn't get this antibiotic filled, it was too expensive. Like, you get the calls when things are bad. You know, patients rarely call you to say, great job, I really had an awesome experience in the ER, let me just write you a letter of accommodation. Like, no, you don't get those as much. So it is a thankless, you know, kind of position, but you have to find your wins, you know, within what you're doing all the time, and just make sure that however it is in terms of your style that you want to practice. I know some docs that call every single patient, you know, they take a day that they're not working and do all their callbacks for the patients just to do, you know, follow up to make sure that they're doing better, if they need to see specialists, how their experience was in the ER. Some docs, you know, take a whole shift and do stuff like that. And it's not that they're getting paid for it. It's not administrative hours. It's just what they need for closure for the experience, or if they were concerned about that patient or want to do follow-up, you know, whatever it is in terms of your style of management and practice. A lot of that is not in your handbook for how to be a great doctor. You just have to figure out what's your style and what's your technique.
I have one more question before we move into a little bit about the medical marijuana.
Yeah, sure.
So can you kind of elaborate about the difficulties of having a child right in the middle of medical school and right in the middle of residency?
Sure, no problem. I talk to my women medical students a lot about career planning and life planning, because the one thing that you'll grow to resent is, did I delay my family for my career? Or did I delay my career because of my family? And that's a very hard decision to make. So timing is really important, and nothing works on your time or when you think things should be done. So it's always, a higher power that has your path already predestined for you. It's just a matter of you walking in that path. Um, so I talk to a lot of my, especially my women students, because they struggle with that often. For me, fortunately, the way I did it is I got engaged and pregnant in my 4th year of medical school. And I remember being on my last emergency medicine rotation at Grady Hospital in Atlanta, Georgia. And I was 37 weeks, and I was like dying trying to walk through, the hallways and the corridors. And when I would sit down to see patients, it was just like, oh, I don't want to get up, just kind of waddling through the ER. And my motivation at the time was, I just have to get this done before this baby comes. I have to get this done. And planning wise, it worked out great for me. What I did was I graduated medical school in May, and I ended up interviewing while I was pregnant, but I was still very early, so no one knew I was pregnant. So I didn't declare that or say anything, not saying that you have to, but for me personally, I just didn't want that to be a point of discussion. I wanted my work to shine for itself. So I ended up interviewing while I was in my first and early second trimester. And once I got accepted into residency, I deferred a year. So when I graduated that, late spring, early summer, and tying up all your loose ends and things like that, I decided not to go right into residency in August because my daughter was due in October. So timing wise, I took that next year off and deferred my start date for residency for 1 year until the following July. I ended up delivering my daughter October 16th, and allowed me about 8 months home with her that I would not have otherwise had. So I was able to really get great first year bonding time with her. And then when I jumped into residency that following July, she was, almost 8 months, and it felt better for me that, okay, she's still young enough, but, I had to wean off of breastfeeding and things like that, and just kind of plan a little bit better in terms of support and care. But it worked out great for my timing, and that's what part of my sacrifice and commitment was. Yeah, it hurt to see, my graduating classes and fellow students, finish their first year and knock out their internship year while I was still sitting at home with a baby, so it was definitely mentally hard. But I also, on the flip side, would have felt a lot of guilt and remorse had I, started residency knowing that I'm going to have to take time off once I had the baby, and that time off be limited to 12 weeks, and have to rush back to residency and not be able to do my, first year mom stuff with my daughter that was really important to me. So everyone makes it work with their schedule, but that bridge time in between med school and residency is a perfect year to kind of have a child or plan for a family, if that is how your timing works. And then also at the end of residency, your last year, last 6 months are always a great time, because you're getting ready to go into career, or you're getting ready to go into fellowship, or whatever it is you decide to do. So being cognizant about your windows of when you can do that and allow you the maximum time, but also be thoughtful for your group. So, I shorted my residency, and they were, one person short, because I told them, in the spring and March when I got accepted, that, hey, I'm gonna, kind of defer my start date and stuff like that. So it allowed a person who was either waitlisted or whatever to kind of come in and fill that slot. But, it's important to be mindful of how they're allocating their funding for residencies as well too, and make sure that, you don't turn them off, and they could have easily been like, oh, whatever, we accepted you for this year, not for next year. So luckily it was something that I had an awesome experience at Morristown Hospital. They were very accommodating, and 3 of the 7, emergency medicine residency class that I was in, 3 of the 7 were women, and all 3 of us had kids. So they were very understanding of that. And that's rare. Like when we graduated, my director and chairman was like, I've never had a class where all the women in the emergency medicine, residency class were mothers. And I just have to say how much harder they worked, and how much, more on point in terms of timing, and knowing that they had little time when they were off and stuff like that. So they really spoke to the grace of how we were able to carry motherhood and kind of survive residency at the same time. But it's a real thing. It's definitely a real thing. And you just pray you have a supportive team and partner and family, because that's who I relied on to raise my daughter the first 3 years.
Wow. That's amazing.
That is amazing.
It's a lot, but you figure it out. If you want both, you make it happen.
Yep. Okay. So are we ready to switch to kind of start talking about the medical marijuana and your
Yeah,
business?
sure. So one thing that's great about emergency medicine is, you can do as many or as little shifts a month. There's a contract that you sign for that, whether it requires you 120 hours a month or however that is, there's a lot of flexibility, because you can literally work 24/7, 36-hour shifts, whatever it is that you want it to be, that can accommodate your lifestyle. So when I was first starting out, I did exclusively nights because I wanted to be present with my kid in the daytime. That was really my only time to be able to see her. She went to bed at 8 o'clock at one point, and I would be just getting home from a day shift at 8 o'clock. You were working 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. By the time you get home, it's 8. And then my kid would be asleep all night, and then I'm gone before she wakes up in the morning. So what I found was, in order for me to get family time, I needed to do nights. So I came out the gate just doing exclusively nights, and that allowed me more free time in the day to get that breakfast time with her, take her to school, and then when she gets home at 3 in the afternoon, do lunch and early dinner and homework and stuff like that. So whatever it is, your lifestyle and family dynamic that works for you, you just have to make it happen. Now as she got older, she's 11 now, and my niece is 13, I can do a mix of both, because they don't need me as much in the daytime. Now they're going to bed at 10 o'clock, they're on Zoom school, they're waking up at 8, class starts at 8:45. Like it's much more of a flexible situation, so that I don't have to be the exclusive night doc anymore. They love that when you come out, you're young, you're fresh, you want to work nights. The older people are like, great, less nights for me, that's awesome. But that evolves. So you don't want to pigeonhole yourself into one type of, role or one type of shift or anything like that. But for the first 2 years, that's what I did. With that flexibility, it allowed me blocks of time. So the way I set up my schedule is I would work in 4-day blocks. And, whether I was doing 10 shifts a month, that's a 4-day block, a day off, another 4-day block, and then a weekend, so it kind of allowed me a full 2 weeks off in my month to be able to pursue other things. And whether that's plan a vacation or, be present for school activities, or, get some me time, go to the spa, whatever it is you want to do. So I got really invested in the debate about medical marijuana, which got approved in November 2016 in the state of Florida, and became certified in the spring and launched my own company. It was something that I tell people all the time, you have to have multiple streams of income in no matter what you do, no matter whether you're an ER doctor, a surgeon, a podiatrist, like whatever it is you are, you cannot rely or depend on one stream of income. As we all have seen in this pandemic, your shifts can be cut, overnight. Your demand can be, change, and you have to go to another state to work, or you have to do locums, or you have to do other things. So you have to be certified in multiple facilities. You have to make sure that you're maintaining your ATLS, PALS, and BLS, and all of those certifications. You have to stay up to date on different state laws if you have different state licenses and stuff like that. But I became invested in medical marijuana because I wanted a different stream of income. I wanted an outlet for something that I was passionate about. And I was seeing a lot of overdose in the emergency department, young people too. At one point, Miami was the epicenter for raves and fun and hanging out, and people came down for spring break and summers, and it was a vacation spot, not anything like what it is right now, but that's what our city has been known for. So I was getting several students, not even students, but several young adults overdosing to the point that I wasn't able to bring them back. We had a real big thing with like K2 and designer drugs and Molly and, things that have been compounded that not only decrease your respiratory drive, but sent you into a full out, coma. And I wasn't able to bring them back. And it was really a part of me trying to figure out how I can address pain management, how I can address substance abuse, and how I can, offer alternative and complementary medicine so that people understand you don't have to be addicted to benzos and narcotics and opiates, and understand that there are alternative ways to deal with, inflammation and pain control. So it became an education thing for the patients. And then I was like, all right, if I'm going to be telling people about this, I need to have a website or something to send them to so they can have follow-up, because everything on the internet wasn't trusted. You were getting different information from different sources that was really sketchy at one point. So I wanted a great resource for people to feel comfortable for their patient referral. So I built this website, not me personally, but paid somebody to do it. It's not my specialty. And I uploaded things that were important to me. So having links for resources, understanding what's available in the state of Florida. And then shortly thereafter became certified by doing a course and gaining additional certification, which is good for 2 years, issued by the Florida Department of Health, and you renew it just as needed. If you want to continue to practice in the state, you have to have a clean DEA license. Make sure that you have no infractions on your, physician license and medical history and records and stuff like that. And once I got approved, I had to teach myself on how to prescribe for patients. So I did a lot of self-research in terms of learning about CBD and learning about THC and dosing and reactions and, stuff like that. What methods would be available for delivery in the state of Florida. Like, we just got edibles about 2 weeks ago, and we've been approved for medical marijuana for over 3 years. Flower just became available 1 year ago. When we first started, all you could do was either vape medical marijuana or do topicals or pills or tinctures. Now we have over 6 different ways to deliver, medical marijuana, which is great because not everybody, uses it the same way, and they get different kind of feels from it depending on what your delivery system is and how quickly it starts to impact you. But all of that is self-taught. So I didn't learn any of that in medical school. I did that by joining organizations that, were really proactive. And the states that I found that I gained the most information from were states like Colorado and California, which have been recreational for several years. So going through that process, I tried to get a good mentor, which to me has always been key. I was able to meet up with some great people and just kind of get more involved heavily. And once I started doing that work, I started to gain patients. I did everything through social media and telemedicine. And that was been my grow point. And everyone that I meet is by word of mouth. I don't do any, TV advertising or any magazine advertising or anything like that. I try to keep my practice super boutique because I want to be super hands-on with all my patients, but it allows me a lot more time for discussion and conversation and flexibility, because they also know I'm not your typical 9 to 5 Monday to Friday doctor. I have patients that text me at 10 o'clock at night, and that's just what works for me because they understand that I'm balancing the emergency medicine schedule and also doing medical cannabis down here. So it can work for you whichever way you want it to flow. You just have to make sure that you are being fair to both sides of your discipline and make sure that your patients are, feeling like they have access to you and feeling like they, have comfort during this process, because it's still very new, especially for, patients that have never tried it before. They need a lot more hand holding and reassurance. So you just have to make sure that if you yourself personally can't do it, you have your nurse or your, physician assistant or whoever it is that your designated educator is, that they're able to be accessible for your patients. But it's been a great ride, and as you can see, it's really evolved in the last 3 years in terms of the support in Florida and the discussion nationwide about legalization and, you know, expungement and justice and things like that. So it's really kind of bled into all areas of politics and medicine and pharmacology and descheduling medical marijuana and stuff like that. So it can go, very far in terms of topics of conversation and what we're fighting for. But main thing for me is making sure that patients had adequate information, good solid information, and knew what they were getting into, because it is a financial responsibility as well too. It's much cheaper to go get 30 Percocet, which is covered by your insurance, for $4 than it is to go to a dispensary and pay cash for a vape pen and cartridge of, oil, which can be up to $80, $90 depending on what you're getting. So I have to also be mindful that patients understand their commitment. The card itself is $75 per year. The maximum length of time you can do prescriptions for are 7 months at a time. Doctors charge on refill basis. So it's just a whole new conversation and vocabulary for patients to learn about terpenes and purple haze and lemon drops and grandma kush and different things. Like, these are not typical discussions that I have in the ER. So not only did I have to learn, but in order for me to teach somebody else, I had to, kind of experience some of those things too. So I've tried several different strains. I've tried different delivery methods in terms of tinctures and vape and flower and stuff like that, and topicals. And just understanding what I like might not be the same thing as what other patients like too. So I can speak from my experience, but I always tell patients you have to go into the dispensary, talk to the bud tenders, go through your ailments, do your research prior to going, have your questions ready. It's much more of a self-organized process, as opposed to patients trust me when I say take your lisinopril 1 tablet twice a day, every day for the rest of your life. They're more trusting of that because lisinopril has been on the market for 30, 40, 50 years. It is a brand that is well known. It is a dosage that is, affordable, A, financially, but B, something that they've seen their grandparents use or seen other people use. So they don't feel as foreign in the process, versus me sending them to a dispensary. They have to find the closest one to them. They have to bring cash to pay for their product. They have to, talk to the bud tenders, which can take up to an hour to understand all the different selections and products and what works best for you. So they have to keep in mind what I've prescribed for them. And, they have to be a lot more conscious about their use and when they're using it and side effects and things like that. So it's much more of an art in medical marijuana than it is doing Western prescriptions, I would say.
Are there any strict contraindications, and are there any methods of delivery that you find more effective than the others, or that you recommend more often?
It's preference. It's preference. So for my example, I have a couple patients with esophageal and lung cancer. I'm not, prescribing vape and flower for them because it's more irritating for the soft tissue, or can cause more cough or, inhalant irritation. So for those patients, I'm doing more tinctures, and I'm also doing more edibles, things like that. For my patients who are coming in with, chronic gastritis and stomach upset, they don't feel as well taking the pills or the edibles. So I have to be more conscious of the vaping or doing more, topicals and things like that, or sublingual tinctures. So your method for delivery is well thought out with the other past medical history that we're dealing with and what we're trying to accomplish in it. Delivery, and also the impact of when you take something, taking an edible on a full stomach versus an empty stomach, it's going to have a quicker onset of action, as opposed to, if you're taking it right after you ate and all the food has to process, you might have a delayed 1 to 2 hour onset of action. So teaching patients, just because it doesn't hit you in that first 15, 20 minutes, you don't double back and take a second, third, and fourth one, because then you're going to be out of it. So just trying to make sure that patients understand that process. But it's a very customized process depending on what we're trying to achieve. And my whole goal with everything is starting very low and using the minimal amount of THC or CBD to achieve maximum relief, because it is an out-of-pocket expense. And I always try to be financially conscious of, this investment that my patients are making. But versus oral, versus vape, versus flower, versus topical, they all have different onset of action, depending on your body fat, depending on your history of use, depending on what time of day you're using it. Everything, is very integrated. So it's not a blanket recommendation, like take 2 puffs of your vape pen 3 times a day, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. It doesn't work like that. You really have to spend a lot of time discussing patients. If you're using an indica, if you're using a sativa, what's your goal? Do you want it for sleep? Do you want it for nausea? Like, what are you trying to accomplish? And making sure that patients use it to get the maximal benefits out of it. So it takes a lot more time in the discussion and the teaching aspect than it does me just giving you a prescription for Tylenol with codeine. People will take that and not read the side effects, or not read the 10-page pamphlet in the in the pharmacology handout, because they're trusting of a brand that's been around a long time and that they've seen other people use or have personally used themselves, as opposed to taking the time to invest in your health and learning for yourself, what can I do that is less addictive? What can I do that is, complementary to the other medical problems that I already have? How can I have a more holistic approach to my lifestyle and, my medical practice, and make sure that whatever I'm doing is for the longevity of myself and to achieve the maximal relief with, the minimal amount of product, and be thoughtful of non-addictive substances. But that takes time, and it takes a patient willing to meet you halfway. So I do a lot of that in my initial screening for my patients. Patients really have to seek you out and be ready to engage in the process. I don't need to look for patients, because everyone's not willing to do the work with you. And if they're not, it's not going to be a successful interaction. I've had patients before that have bought product and tried it once or twice and said, hey, this doesn't work for me. So you've invested $150, $200 and you're ready to give up because you are not, it's not working on a time schedule like you're used to. If you're used to taking your pills every single day at the same time, that might not be how you use your vape pen. So teaching patients all of those little keys are really important to having a successful, engagement with the patient, and making sure that they are committed to the process, because it's expensive. It really is not cheap, and there isn't any insurance that covers for it. It's all cash out of pocket expense, things like that. And you want to make sure that, one review of a patient saying, oh, this didn't work for me, Dr. Lynn prescribed this, like that can really tank your business. So you have to really understand and help patients understand, why didn't that work for you? Let's kind of talk through what you were feeling at the time. Maybe your impact 2 hours later was from that dose you took, a couple hours ago, but you didn't realize that. So kind of going through those methods with the patient and helping them to understand the delayed onset and factors that influence those things, but making sure that they're conscious enough and astute enough and aware enough to pay attention to that is really key. So patients have to want to do it with you. It's not anything that I need to go find patients for. There's more than enough patients that are interested, but they have to do a lot of the legwork and research themselves before engaging in this process too.
Mm-hmm. So to me, it seems like you're taking a very thorough, like, past medical history, social history.
Yeah.
I remember in our conversation the other day, you mentioned the law. So if maybe they live with someone who absolutely cannot be around it, that could present a problem. Where do you see the future of this field going, especially legally and I guess medically, as therapy and stuff like that?
We're over 36 states with medical legalization at this point, and about a third of those have recreational legalization. So eventually, and a lot of it depends on politics and regime and what your state will allow, and those kind of things that are out of our control, but have a lot of impact from the population. So for example, the number of medical licenses that are approved in the state. A medical license allows for a company to kind of come in and build dispensaries, because the way Florida works is vertical integration. So you're going from planting the seed in the soil to growing the plant, to manufacturing the plant, to packaging it and processing it, to getting it on the shelf, to selling it. All of that has to happen within the state. You can't, just kind of have your bud shipped from California and then the distillery here, kind of strains it out and then they put it in the cartridge. Like, it has to be a whole stem to sale kind of process. And that's just how vertical integration has been. You won't find that in recreational states, which allows different level of licenses to occur. And it also allows many other people and companies to get involved, because you might have one license for manufacturing, one license for product development, one license for agriculture, one license for distribution. You might own a dispensary. There's different types of licenses. So practicing within the parameters of your state are really, really, really important, and making sure that you're following guidelines and things like that. But eventually, I think we will become recreational, because that's the direction the country is moving to. And, we've had a lot of discussion in terms of descheduling. There was actually supposed to be a bill up for discussion about 2 weeks ago, and it kind of got delayed till after the election, about descheduling medical marijuana, or marijuana in general, and cannabis from a Schedule 1 drug. Schedule 1 drugs are things like heroin, crack, cocaine, stuff like that. So descheduling them from that to a Schedule 2 or less, which would allow more free reign in terms of prescribing. And also for research. A Schedule 1 drug has, quote unquote, no medical benefits. So colleges and agriculture and pharmacies are not allowed to do research on a project like that. They won't get federal or government funding for a project like that, because it's considered a medication that is not of any benefit to the patient, right? So there's a lot of figuring out and navigating that process, that once descheduling happens, then we can get to decriminalization of the product, and then we can get to expungement of, minor medical marijuana charges and stuff like that. So it's a whole tunnel and pipeline of things that will follow with the descheduling. But that's, one of the key things. I definitely think Florida will eventually become recreational, but a lot of it depends on who's in office at that time and what the population of Florida votes for. The more licenses are approved depends on the number of patients that get approved. Right now, we have over 400,000 approved active patients that are card holders in the state of Florida, which indicates we have over 22 medical licenses. And as we start getting closer to 450 and 500,000 patients, they will allow more medical license to develop more dispensaries and more facilities to grow. So it's all with vertical integration and according to those parameters. But eventually, I do foresee us kind of catching with that wave of being recreational, but it's going to take a little bit more time than we thought. It was up for ballot last year in election and didn't get approved. So maybe another, couple years, we'll see it become available again for discussion and election. And we just have to see what the state does. It's really a state level that makes those decisions on it right now.
So if it becomes legal, that would take away the need. I mean, I still think you should consult with your physician for it, but that would take legally your step out of that. So what would you do to adapt as a business?
So business-wise, for me, it's something that, as we always talked about when we first started this conversation, having multiple streams of income, right? So product development, consulting. What I do right now as a physician, an active physician prescriber in the state of Florida, I do a lot of consulting with other agencies nationwide about marketing and about patient reaction and goals for management and equitable pricing and stuff like that. So a lot of that reform is available once you get a solid knowledge base of what you're actually, prescribing and selling. And you have the case studies of actual interactions with patients and side effects and things that they've gone through to back up your data to say, hey, this worked great, this hasn't worked great. What you don't have is quote unquote scientific evidence to back it up. So a lot of what we do in medicine is evidence-based. You want to see which journal published it, what year was it published, how many people were in the study, how many people, like, you want to get all of that information, but you can't get that if a drug is a Schedule I drug. So descheduling it would allow us to gain more solid information. So what we use a lot right now is, patient stories and patient interaction and case studies and things like that, and a lot of surveys. But I do a lot of consulting with other companies. So even if it got to the point that we became recreational and it wasn't necessarily needed for medical marijuana prescribers and they didn't need a card, what the advantage of having a medical marijuana card is your taxes are way less. For example, if you go to Vegas and you try to purchase medical marijuana or cannabis in general, since it's a recreational state in Vegas, you will be taxed at a much higher percent for recreational use than you will for medicinal use. Just to give you an idea, taxes up to 28, 29, 30% for recreational use, as opposed to medical marijuana use, they're usually 10, 11, 12, 13%. So it's a big difference in terms of taxing. So people like to keep their card for one, financial reasons, but also two, personal reasons. So say, for example, you had to end up getting a drug test at your job. You want to be able to show that I'm using medical cannabis that's going to come up positive on your drug test for medicinal purposes, and you have a licensed prescriber managing your dosing and refilling your prescriptions and monitoring your usage and stuff like that. So there is the personal reason for career-wise, for whatever, other stigmas you may have in terms of family, in terms of, guidance. It won't be mandatory to have a medical marijuana card to be able to obtain the product, but there are some distinct reasons that would be great for it. One of the things that I have done in terms of diversification in the last 2 years is doing a lot more consulting with other agencies and also partnering and branding with CBD companies, because CBD has been, more hemp-based and doesn't require as much regulation and things like that. So it's more of a open market to get into. But I couldn't do that when I first came out the gate. I had to take the last 3, almost 4 years learning and evolving and growing in the process to feel that I had enough expertise and knowledge to be able to consult and do things like that. So it takes time. It definitely takes time, but keep growing your platform, keep figuring out, what it is that you want to do and where you want to go with it, and make sure that you're always trying to be one step ahead. So that is definitely a concern for people like me who, are down here prescribing and stuff like that. But it's not going to diminish my income. It's not going to change, what I do. If anything, it just allows more room for us to openly get involved, as opposed to being, an alternative. Hopefully it'll become a primary source for pain management and treatment, as opposed to being, quote unquote, an alternative to, narcotics. Once a narcotic has failed, then you try medical marijuana, thinking about it as a first line therapy as opposed to a last. So hopefully that mindset will change. It takes time with the culture, but as long as you keep advocating for what you believe is right, I think eventually it'll all, come into fruition. And you just got to make sure you're working with a great population of people who are proactive in their approach to learning more about it. And I think we have a really good, solid, foundation in Florida in terms of people who want to be involved and who are advocating for it and making sure that it's properly used.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing.
No problem, guys.
And I just, one more question. Given your experiences in emergency medicine and medical marijuana as well, just do you have any general advice for all medical students in terms of how to find their passion, and also maybe do something entrepreneurial like you're doing in the future, and potentially branching out into something else on the side, which I thought was very, very interesting.
You just want to survive where you're at, be present in the moment. You can't think about being an entrepreneur and different streams of income until you've passed all your shelf exams and passed your licensing examinations and, gone through your formal training. I can't be a medical marijuana physician unless I was a licensed, emergency medicine doctor. And I'm not saying it has to be emergency medicine. You can be a family medicine, internal medicine. You can be an OBGYN. You could be any discipline that you want to, but you have to be residency trained and certified and board certified before you're able to become a medical marijuana prescriber, right? So you have to keep in mind that everything is in succession. So what I like for what you guys are doing right now is you're starting to plant seeds into things that are important for you. So you're starting your podcast, you're learning not only yourself about different disciplines, which is going to give you one step ahead on thinking about where you want to be and what type of medicine you want to do, but eventually, you're going to get into your 4th year rotations and you're going to start studying for your USMLEs, and you're going to be like, damn, I don't have as much time for this podcast. So what are you going to do? You're going to bring on another 1st or 2nd year medical student and start interning them and training them. And you're going to eventually transition what you're doing to help, expand it. So that way you don't feel all the burden on yourself, right? So things like that are important to think about succession, but you can't get to one before you do your basics. You have to knock out your foundation first and get a solid footing before you kind of jump into all those things. Many of us, when we're in school, we want to just jump to the attending level and, start making the big money and start doing this. You want to just kind of jump into that, but you have to understand and respect the process to getting there, because otherwise, it makes it 10 times harder if you go, in the wrong direction of overcommitting and not spending enough time for, the things that you need to graduate from this residency, or the things that you need to solidify your examinations and your shelf exams and all of those things. If you can't get through those steps because you're too busy taking on other commitments, then you won't get to your ultimate goal. So I think the most important thing is find something you do love, because we all need an outlet during this time. And whether that's music or podcast or blogging or whatever it is you're going to do, you make sure it has a positive, great impact for your audience, and make sure it's something that you're passionate about, because it's going to display in your conversation. It's going to display in how you deliver your message. So pursuing your passions are always important, but no, don't let it blindside your ultimate goal. You spent the last, 20 years trying to get into medical school. So that's your ultimate goal right now. That is your immediate, kind of desire that needs to be accomplished first before being able to do everything else. Because there is time. You have more than enough time, and you will be able to do all those things. Just make sure that your footing is right, and that you're being able to devote the time that you need to for your rotations and for your studying, because it takes a lot. It takes your full commitment, but you'll get there. You'll definitely get there. So keep in mind your passion, and definitely be respectful of the process. And whatever it is you want to do, you can do it. Just don't let it block or interfere or delay what you have to do in order to get to your goal.
I like that. Thank you so much for sharing.
You're welcome. No problem. It's been great meeting with you guys. Awesome conversation. I hope that this is able to take off and feed a lot of questions that, other people may have and stuff like that. And let me know how I could be of any help.
That was a blast for us. I know that. I could ask you questions all day. So I thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure. Definitely, guys. We'll be in touch, okay?
Thank you.
Best of luck. Bye.
Bye-bye.